The phone vibrated on the kitchen counter at 2:40 a.m., its pale blue light cutting through the dark like a blade, and my breath caught before I could stop it. That phone had been buried with my husband 3 years earlier, and yet it hummed like it still belonged to this house, to this life. The refrigerator clicked on. The rain tapped the window, and all I could hear was my own pulse pounding in my ears. If you're listening right now and you've ever felt your stomach drop for no clear reason, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because moments like this don't feel dramatic until they happen to you. I stood there frozen, fingertips numb, staring at something that should not exist, feeling the quiet certainty that whatever safety I thought I had left was gone. I didn't know it yet. But that vibration was the first crack in everything I trusted, and nothing after that night stayed buried. I was standing alone in my kitchen when the phone rang, and for a moment my body forgot how to breathe. I am 65 years old, a widow for nearly a year, and nothing unexpected ever calls my house anymore. The sound was wrong, too familiar, cutting through the quiet like a memory refusing to stay buried. The phone was in my hand before I remembered that it should not exist. It was my husband's old phone, the one the police said vanished with him, the one I packed away with his clothes and his scent. My fingers trembled as the vibration hummed against my palm, steady and patient, as if whoever was calling knew I would answer. I did not move. I listened to the refrigerator cycle on and off, to the clock ticking above the sink, to my own pulse beating in my ears. I remember thinking how calm the room looked, how ordinary everything was, and how that made the moment feel unreal. I had loved this quiet life. After my husband died, silence became my shelter, predictable and safe. But standing there, holding that phone, I felt something shift deep inside me. A question formed before fear could catch up. If the past was calling me now, what else had been waiting to wake up? Before that call, my life was quiet in a way that felt earned. I had been married for 42 years, long enough that our routines felt like muscle memory. Mornings meant coffee at the same kitchen table. Evenings meant walking the edge of the land we worked side by side, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. We built this place slowly. The house, the fences, the habits that held us together. It was not a grand life, but it was solid. I knew who I was inside it. A wife, a mother, a woman trusted to make decisions without asking permission. When my husband died, that certainty thinned. Not all at once, but in small, almost polite ways. People spoke to me more gently, as if my ears had grown fragile. Doctors explained things I already understood. Neighbors checked in often, then lingered, scanning the house like it was suddenly unfamiliar. My son Daniel and his wife Claire meant well. I believe that even now. Their concern arrived wrapped in offers to help, then suggestions, then quiet assumptions about what I could no longer handle alone. Paperwork appeared on my table already sorted. Visits happened without warning. Conversations shifted towards safety, downsizing, what made sense at my age. I did not argue. I adjusted. I told myself this was what love looked like after loss. Still, somewhere beneath the gratitude, a question waited. If everyone else was deciding what was best for me, when had I stopped being asked? The silence before everything changed was already cracking. I still remember how ordinary that afternoon was, the kind of day that leaves no mark, the kind you would never think to question later. I was sitting in a small cafe, light spilling across the table, my mind half elsewhere, when something shifted without warning. It was not dramatic. There was no raised voice or sudden movement. What stayed with me was the feeling in my chest, a tightening that came before any clear thought. Someone stepped into my space, close enough that I could sense urgency without understanding it. A small object was placed in front of me, solid and deliberate, as if it belonged there. I remember nodding, smiling even, because that is what you do when a moment feels awkward instead of dangerous. Logic rushed in quickly. I told myself it was nothing, that grief makes you sensitive, that strangers cross paths every day without meaning. I finished my coffee. I went home. I locked the door and felt foolish for checking twice. But the unease did not leave. It followed me through familiar rooms, settled into the quiet like a draft I could not trace. I kept replaying the moment, not the details, but the way it felt directed, intentional, as if I had been chosen rather than stumbled upon. By nightfall, I understood something I did not want to admit yet. Whatever that warning was, it had not been meant for anyone, not me. I spent that evening alone, moving through the house as if it might notice me. Everything was where it had always been, yet nothing felt settled. The air felt tight. Floors creaked louder. Even the clock sounded impatient, marking time I could not control. I tried to distract myself with small tasks. I made tea and forgot it on the counter. I checked the locks, then checked them again, embarrassed by my own nerves. I kept telling myself I was tired, that grief plays tricks when the light fades. Still, I waited. The waiting stretched. The silence pressed closer. I became aware of my breathing, of how my shoulders stayed lifted instead of resting. The phone sat nearby, heavier than it should have been, like an object carrying intent. When it finally rang, the sound cut straight through me, not loud, not frantic, just precise. My body reacted before my thoughts did. My hands shook, my stomach dropped. I knew, instantly, that this was what I had been warned about. I did not hear words so much as I felt recognition. Familiarity twisted into something cold. The voice reached places, memory lives, places logic cannot protect. When the sound stopped, the room did not return to normal. I stood there long after, holding a phone that connected me to what should have stayed gone. In that moment, I understood the danger was no longer theoretical. Whatever had entered my life that night was already inside my walls, and nothing would feel safe the same way again after that point forward. I did not tell my son about the call, not at first. I needed time to understand what I felt before handing it to someone else. But he arrived the next morning anyway, as if summoned by something he could not name. His presence used to comfort me. That day, it felt intrusive. He moved through the house with familiarity that no longer felt earned, pointing out small things, asking questions that sounded practical but landed heavy. I noticed how often he looked around, not at me, but past me. The conversation drifted where it always seemed to lately. The land, the upkeep, my age, the way winters are harder alone. Each concern sounded reasonable on its own. Together, they formed a net. I was no longer being asked what I wanted. I was being guided toward what had already been decided. When I hesitated, the tone shifted, softer, slower, like I might not follow unless things were simplified. I felt heat rise in my chest, anger edged with grief. This was my home, my life. Yet I was being treated like a temporary guest in it. Then came the suggestions wrapped in caution: paperwork, advisors, protections for my own good. Words like guardianship hovered without fully landing, close enough to threaten without saying so aloud. That was when it became clear. This was not about my safety. It was about control. Someone was preparing the ground beneath me, quietly, carefully, as if I would not notice. I watched my son speak and realized something painful and sharp. The danger I felt was no longer outside my family. It was sitting across from me, already planning my absence. The silence afterward pressed in, forcing me to confront a question I had been avoiding, one that would not stay quiet longer. That night, sleep never came. I lay in the dark listening to the house settle, every small sound pulling my thoughts back to the same place. I replayed the past days again and again, not searching for comfort, but for patterns. I thought about how quickly concern had turned into urgency, how suggestions had hardened into plans, how my hesitation had been met not with patience, but with pressure. Each memory lined up too neatly to ignore. Fear had kept me quiet at first, fear of being wrong, fear of losing what little peace I had left, but as the hours passed, fear began to thin, replaced by something colder and clearer. Logic. One question surfaced and refused to sink back down. It did not arrive with drama or anger. It came calmly, almost gently, and once it was there, I could not pretend I had not heard it. What would my son gain if I left everything behind? The question changed how I saw everything that followed. It reframed the concern, the timing, the insistence. It stripped away the language of care and left motive exposed. I understood then that confronting him would get me nowhere. Arguments only warn people they are being watched. Silence, I realized, does the opposite. So I stopped reacting. I listened more closely. I noted what was said too quickly and what was avoided entirely. I let the calm settle in, not as surrender, but as preparation. By the time the sky lightened outside my window, I knew reassurance was no longer enough. If I wanted safety, I would need facts, and the only place to find them was in what my husband had left behind. I started in my husband's study because it was the only room that still felt like his. Sorting through his things felt less like searching and more like grieving in slow motion. Old manuals, receipts, notes written in his careful handwriting. I told myself I was just organizing, giving the space some order. At first, everything made sense. Familiar papers, familiar habits. Then I noticed what did not belong. An envelope tucked where it should not have been, documents that felt heavier than their paper weight, names of firms I did not recognize, dates that landed too close to the time he disappeared. My chest tightened as I realized I was holding pieces of a life he had never shared with me. The hurt came fast, a sharp, childish pain that asked how a marriage of decades could still hold secrets. I sat there longer than I meant to, letting that feeling wash through me before I could think clearly again. As I kept going, the shape of things began to change. There were patterns, records of land surveys, notes about boundaries, mentions of meetings that lined up with nights he came home quiet and distracted. The absences I once brushed aside now carried weight. I remembered how careful he had been those last months, how he double-checked locks, how he asked me questions that felt casual at the time, about where I kept things, about what I would do if something happened to him. I had thought it was age or worry. It was preparation. The realization settled slowly and heavily. He had not been hiding something from me. He had been hiding me from something, from someone. By the time I closed the last folder, grief had taken on a new edge. Whatever danger he had been shielding me from had not disappeared with him. It had simply been waiting. I walked to the barn because it had always been the safest place on the property. My husband loved the quiet there, the way the walls held years of work and patience. That night, it felt watched. The shadows stretched differently, and the familiar smells turned sharp. What I learned there did not come all at once. It arrived carefully, through explanations meant to steady me rather than scare me. My husband had reached out beyond our town long before he died. He had asked for help because what he found was bigger than our family, bigger than a private mistake. The land beneath my feet was being used in ways I had never imagined. Hidden paths, storage, movement that blended into the rural quiet. It explained the surveys, the late nights, the careful questions he asked me near the end. It explained why silence had mattered so much. Then came the truth I could barely hold. My son knew, not accidentally, not briefly. He had agreed to it, first out of pressure, then out of choice. The words settled into me like weight. I did not cry. I did not speak. Something inside me folded in on itself, slow and final. In that moment, confusion ended. This was not a family disagreement or a misunderstanding that time could soften. It was organized, deliberate, and still active. The barn was no longer shelter. The land was no longer neutral. Fear rose, but it no longer scattered my thoughts. It gathered them. If this danger had roots, then staying alive meant learning where they were and deciding how to cut them. Carefully. I prepared myself for what would come next alone. I expected fear to consume me after that, but something else happened instead. The panic rose, sharp and demanding, and then it stalled. I realized that fear wanted movement, noise, reaction, and reaction would only make me visible. So I slowed everything down. I paid attention to my breathing, to the way my thoughts lined up when I did not rush them. I told myself that surviving this would not require strength in the way movies describe it. It would require control. I understood then that appearing fragile could be useful. People relax when they believe you are overwhelmed. They stop guarding their words. They reveal timelines, intentions, assumptions. Control makes people careless. I let my voice soften. I let my answers trail. I allowed pauses where certainty used to be. Inside, I stayed alert. I remembered everything. Fear did not leave, but it changed shape. It became a signal rather than a command. Each time it surfaced, I translated it into patience. Each urge to confront turned into another reason to wait. By the time night settled again, I was no longer bracing for impact. I was preparing space. There was something I needed to do alone, on the land that still held my history, and I would only do it when I was certain no one was watching. I walked the property after dark, letting the night hide me. Every step stirred memory. The fence my husband fixed each spring, the oak where our son carved his initials, the narrow path we took after dinner when we needed to talk without walls listening. I stopped near the old rose bush behind the house. I planted it the year my mother died. My husband helped me dig that hole, joking it was deep enough to hide anything important. I remembered laughing, brushing dirt from my hands, never imagining the weight of those words. The ground was cold and hard. My fingers ached as I dug, slow and careful, listening for sounds beyond my breath. Grief sat heavy in my chest, but it did not weaken me. It steadied me. This was not desperation. This was trust. Each scrape of soil felt like a conversation with the past. All the quiet choices my husband made, all the nights he prepared without asking me to carry the fear. When my knuckles struck something solid, my heart did not race. It settled. I pulled until the container came free, heavier than it looked, sealed tight. Holding it, I understood he had never left me unprotected. He had left me instructions in the only language that mattered. I did not linger. Time pressed in around me. Whatever came next would require patience and the ability to look weaker than I was inside myself. I let myself seem smaller. My voice softened. I took longer to answer simple questions. I allowed silence to stretch until others filled it for me. On the surface, I looked exhausted, unsure. like grief had finally worn me down. Inside, everything was steady. It took discipline to pause when I wanted to speak, to nod when I wanted to correct, to let decisions drift instead of insisting on clarity. I learned how easily concern turns into impatience when people think they are in charge. I watched shoulders relax. I noticed how careful words became careless once they believed I was no longer tracking details. I listened more than I spoke. I remembered everything. The way timelines slipped, the way explanations changed slightly depending on who was present. None of it felt dramatic. That was the point. Drama would have warned them. There was a strange relief in being underestimated. No one guards themselves around someone they believe is unraveling. They offer information freely, assuming it will not be used. I let them believe that. Each day I appeared a little more lost, and each day my understanding sharpened. I stopped reacting. I started confirming. I did not feel victorious. I felt prepared. Whatever came next would not need raised voices or confrontation. It would arrive quietly, exactly as it should, and exactly when they no longer saw it coming. That patience became my shield when the end finally unfolded. When it finally happened, it was quiet. No raised voices, no sudden movement. The house held its breath as unfamiliar cars stopped at the edge of the drive, their presence firm and unhurried. The truth arrived the way it always does, without asking permission. I watched everything from a distance that felt unreal. Papers were reviewed, steps were followed. Nothing about it felt dramatic. That was what made it final. This was not an argument that could be talked through or a misunderstanding that could be softened. It was procedure, steady and irreversible. I saw the moment my son understood there was no way out. His posture changed first. The certainty he had carried drained away, replaced by something smaller and unfamiliar. I did not move toward him. I did not reach out. There was nothing left to offer. As he was led away, I felt no satisfaction, only weight. Justice did not feel like victory. It felt like the closing of a door that would never open again. A bond that had once defined my life ended without ceremony. The house grew emptier with each item removed, each step echoing against floors that had known better days. When it was over, silence settled in its place. Not peaceful, just still. I remained where I was, surrounded by what could not be repaired. The truth had been restored, but so much else was gone. And in that stillness, I understood that the hardest part was not surviving what happened, but learning how to live with what remained. When everything was finished, the quiet stayed. Some things were gone forever. My marriage, as I understood it. My relationship with my son. The version of family I once believed was unbreakable. What remained surprised me. I remained. My judgment. My ability to choose. The land itself, steady and unchanged, holding truth instead of secrets. It was never just property. It was memory, proof, and witness. Keeping it was not stubbornness. It was self-respect. I learned that strength does not announce itself. It waits. It watches. It knows when silence is safer than speech. I learned that age does not mean surrendering authority over your own life. It means earning the right to trust yourself more deeply than before. Boundaries, I learned, are not punishments. They are protections. Love without boundaries is not kindness. It is risk. And family, when it demands blindness, is no longer love at all. I grieved what was lost without trying to replace it. I stopped asking why and started accepting what is. Peace did not arrive suddenly. It settled slowly, like dust after a storm. Standing here now, I know what stayed matters more than what left, and I am ready to speak from that place, not as a warning, but as an offering. For anyone listening, my story lives beyond me, waiting quietly where truth and courage finally meet without apology today. If you are still here with me, thank you. Sharing this story was not about reliving pain, but about honoring the quiet moments when instinct speaks and asks to be trusted. What I learned is simple, though it took everything to understand it. When something feels wrong, pause and listen. When love demands silence at the cost of your safety, choose boundaries. Strength does not always raise its voice. Sometimes it waits, watches, and protects itself by staying calm. If my journey connects to you, know this: you are allowed to question what others insist you accept. You are allowed to protect what matters to you, even when it makes people uncomfortable. Age, grief, or kindness do not cancel wisdom. They sharpen it. Thank you for giving me your attention, your patience, and your empathy. Being heard is a powerful thing, and you offered that freely. I hope you leave this story feeling steadier than when you arrived, with a little more trust in yourself. If any part of this resonated with your own life, I invite you to share it in the comments. What moment taught you to listen to your instincts or to stand quietly in your truth? Your voice matters here, and this space is open for reflection, connection, and shared understanding between us all today together.